Good evening
See,
and welcome to another exciting broadcast of ISTR podcast here. Tonight we're going to be talking about performance chips, maybe some not so performance chips, cover everything from stock all the way up to today and see what the progression of these things were over the years from the early days and see what finally won out on the end. So, with that, I know we got Grandmaster Hood over there that's got a pretty good write up on some of the early stock stuff if he wants to dive into that first.
Yeah, Sean was asking what the earliest chip we remember is, not counting performance. The earliest bin that I have a copy of is a pre-production bin, which is a 6052 DOAC or something like that. I can't remember what the code is. But it's a real, you can tell it's like a dyno test chip because there's some really wacky stuff in there, like flags turned off that shouldn't be, really delayed O2 sensor warm-up time, stuff like that. Nothing of really great interest, but that one is late 90, I think, like October, November of 1990 is the date code on that chip. And then the first production Cyclone chip was AYBM, which is, to my knowledge, 1 through about like 900, 8 or 900, something like that. And then after that, all the Cyclones got AYBN. And there's a thread on the chipping and tuning forum, SyTy registry, that details all the changes that were made to each of those chips that I outlined. It's too much to name on here, not really good talking material, but those are the two Cyclone production chips. And then the 92 Cyclones, at least the one that I have experience with, which is the black gray brochure truck, it had an AYBR chip in it, which was, best I can tell, they made some changes to be able to allow that be kind of a putting around truck, a bunch of different people hopping in it, idling all damn day, stuff like that. So there's some weird stuff in that chip as well. And then the Typhoons came out with a BBZA. That was the 92 production chip. There's a couple of 92 pre-production bins that I don't really have much info on, but the production ones were BBZA and then BBZB. And BBZB is broken into about 5 different varieties, and the last one is 1620 is the checksum code on it. And that one has like the increased timing, better timing for cold temperatures, things like that. That's kind of the final polished GM chip. And if you went to the dealership and got a replacement EEPROM, I guess until they quit selling them, it would come as a BBZB because that was what they made after that. And a lot of the performance chips that came after that used the BBZ as kind of the starting point. Now, Sean mentioned there were some that came out after the Cyclone before the Typhoon was released, and I'm just assuming they used an AYBM as the starting point for that.
Now, Hood, when you consider like the stock plug-in chips and like single programs, that would be considered a code 58, right?
Yeah, that's code 58, which is, it gets its name from the checksum code. It came back as a 58 in hex, and then the guys later on, a decade later or more, whatever, that created code 59 just kind of did it as a, like this is the next step kind of thing. But it doesn't really have any bearing on anything. It's just kind of a funny naming scheme.
Gotcha.
And all the factory chips were 2-bar. They were all 16 kilobyte binary code. They were all in the same fashion. They were just, GM was doing as much as they could with the given amount of space on that EEPROM.
I think when like any Bell or ATR and stuff come out, I mean, Sean might remember better than me. Those were upgraded 3-bar chips, weren't they?
No, the first 3-bar stuff was Dig.
The Ultimate.
Yeah.
Well, that's
like a 4-in-1 and then a 10-in-1 or something, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's Todd Austinson. So I had a. Let's see. I'm pretty sure I had a 4-in-1. I'm pretty sure we had a 10 or a 12-in-1 too. Also, but Dig was the guy who started really messing around with the 3-bar write-ups, and then I know Brian Green was involved with it too. Fine-tuning some things on the 3-bar chip in order to get it to work. I mean, I'm sure I burned some early chips, I'm sure.
probably should explain why you had to go to 3 bar and not be able to use a stock 2 bar. I guess, do you want to?
Well, because 14 pounds of boost is bullshit. That's why. Because it's not enough boost.
Well, and
Because
probably what you're remembering, Adam, is ATR actually played around with the overboost code, and they played around with the wastegate control, and the ATR strip chip would allow you to, I think, squeeze out like 16 pounds without hitting an overboost limit, which is the maximum you can run on the stock chip. On the 2 bar is GM's code
Right.
ends at 16 psi. So ATR basically just maxed that out. Now on their street chip, it didn't do that. It still hit overboost at 14.8, 14.9, whatever the factory code was. But they kind of squeezed a little bit out. But you were playing with fire going over 2 bar, with, without any observation. So, Dig, like Sean was mentioning, Dig and all the other guys involved, they realized that if we wanted to be able to fuel for anything over, 2 bar, we needed to be able to see it. So GM had a 3 bar
fuel and time. So
yeah,
I mean, and timing. I mean, not just fuel, but fuel and timing. So
yeah, exactly.
that's. I mean, I guess, when you think about it, if you want to I mean, it depends on how much somebody knows about how ECUs and things work. And, sometimes we may take it for granted that people understand what's going on, but basically it's like a table or a grid. And, on one edge you have one set of parameters, and one edge you have another set of parameters. And it might be something like boost and RPM, or throttle position and boost or something. And then the ECU, just with its inputs, it's looking at those points and then picking those numbers. And so exactly when you're above 14 pounds of boost, if you're at 20 pounds of boost, it's just in the last box. It can't actually correct for whatever numbers is showing. So
yeah. And GM had produced a 3-bar map sensor with the turbo Trans Am, so it was logical just to take that already factory map sensor. It was a 0 to 5 volt map sensor. Nothing crazy needed to be done to incorporate it, except for the coding changes in the ECM, and that could all be done without a massive inflation of data. So it was really easy for those guys. I say easy because it seems easy to us now, but it was difficult back in the day. But it was practical to be able to integrate 3-bar coding into our ECM.
I recall too that if you have a 3-bar chip and a 3-bar map, if you ran into problems with your tuning, you could throw in a 2-bar and go into a limp mode.
It didn't. No combination really liked each other, but you could run a 2-bar map sensor on a 3-bar chip in sort of a limp home method, but the opposite, a 3-bar map on a 2-bar chip would almost certainly result in it not cranking.
And the only reason I bring that up is I recall, like, many years ago, one of our Florida guys, Gary Shanek, he was having an issue. I can't remember if it was the ECM, a chip, or a 3-bar issue where he had 2 bars sitting in the gold box, and he threw it in, and the truck was able to run and get us enough to where we could get back home and off the highway safely. So
yeah, but as Sean mentioned, our ECMs for the time were very advanced. Now, by today's standards, they're extremely archaic. And if you look at it, like Sean was mentioning, it's a table. You can think of it like a spreadsheet if people are familiar with that. You have cells that correspond on kind of an XY grid. And like Sean was saying, if you went over 14 pounds of boost, it would just be stuck at the 14-pound cell when you're in actuality running 18, 19, 20 pounds of boost. So it's fueling and timing and correcting and all this stuff for a much lower boost pressure. And a lot of guys would use cheap methods like crank down on the fuel pressure regulator to be able to run higher. But that's a really, terrible method to be able to tune for it. So the 3-bar solved all that by allowing us to actually observe and correct for higher boost pressures.
So
yes,
I gotta say, with the early tuning, not with just a chip, you had to have the software for tuning. And the earliest one I can remember when I came into it was Diacom.
Yeah, Diacom. Yep. Yeah, I had Diacom. I still have Diacom somewhere. So Diacom and then I mean Diacom that was fucking DOS based, I think, because I did I did open road race with Dabney back in 1999, and we used like one of the first 12 position switch chips, I think, back then.
Yeah.
So, but even before then, I had like one of the really early Todd like 4-position chips. But like I said, in Dabney's truck, we used like a 12-position chip, and his truck, we did like 150 flat out. That was like, and I have it on Dicom somewhere. I have the log because I logged the whole fucking run, like 1 hour of running. Of it seeing 150 miles an hour, at least to the ECU. In real life, actually, we weren't that far off of it. I don't think. I don't remember exactly how fast we were, but it was pretty close to 150.
I remember being in the high 140s, if not right at 150.
Yeah, I said on Diacom it was 150, but in real life, like, because we went through a radar trap, so, and I forget what were we in. Fuck, man, memory. It's 1999. That's almost 19 years ago. So, but anyway, we were using that the some of the very early prototype stuff for the 3-bar chips, and I said some of the other things that were around. I mean, we kind of skipped over some of the other like very early chips that did exist, for the Cyclone and Typhoon, which were like, ATR. I mean, Michael said some stuff about it, and then Kenny Bell's chip, which was missing like knock control, which sounds awesome because hey, if it hears knock, it's not gonna retard timing, so thing's gonna be fucking balls fast until it blows up. And then what else did we? Yeah, Hypertech, a few others. I mean, I don't even know if any of those others really did anything. So
no, the most polished ones that most people went with were the ATR Street chip and then Conley, which were almost mirror images of each other. But those two were pretty well the most polished ones. The other ones were kind of hit or miss. Kenny Bell was pushing the limits. I think their what we call the Kaboom chip was almost a takeaway from their shop truck. I think it was the one that they were tuning for their shop truck at the time. Which Sean knows this better than I do. I think Guy Labby was he a part of that? Were they doing some tuning for him back in the day?
Nah, I think he was running some of their parts, but I was too. Our shop, my parents lived like not very far from Kenny Bell at all. I mean, they lived like 2 miles from there or something. And we were out in that area, but I bought stuff from them. And I talked to them a little bit about some of those stuff then, but I was in the Navy. So I was in the Navy 91 to 97. So those times I was playing around in the Navy. So, definitely. So Guy ended up, he may have been running the chip, but then, we went, him and me both went to, Excel DFI, which, if you know much about, early engine management, Excel DFI is pretty fucking basic. I forget how big the table is. It's like, I think it's 8x8 or something like that. It's pretty like archaic compared to anything that's out there. I mean, even archaic compared to the stock chip, but it did give you a lot of control where you wouldn't necessarily have had it with without being able to get into all the code. So.
And to give a little bit of a precursor for guys who don't know, Sean mentioned about how the actual tuning works, but back in the day, if you needed a chip done, it's not like we do now where you have Holly or whatever your flavor is, and you go and you just make a change and you save it, and that's what you have. You got a pre-programmed chip, and if your combination needed something otherwise, you sent it back and had it reprogrammed, and usually it was a 4 or 5 step process to get it close enough to your truck that you were content. So when Excel and Speed Pro and now ultimately Fast and other things came along, or Holly came along, it made it where you could make those live changes and save them, and it cut out mailing chips back and reburning in your own home and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, yep. I was gonna say, for me, going to DFI on my truck, I mean, I picked up like a second and a half in the quarter, something like that. I went from like, fucking 13.0 to like 11.80 or something. So 11.90. So
I remember everyone that did the standalone stuff, it was always like on the squirting edge of like warming up the engine, because it was like you're trying to push as much as you can and stay within the realm of keeping the motor together.
Yeah,
I mean,
go ahead, Sean.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, honestly, if you can get into the stock ECU and you have a good GUI, a good graphical user interface, the stock ECUs have a huge amount of range. There's nothing, stock chips, stock ECU, stock ECM, whatever we're going to call them. I've been dealing with Skylines for so long, it's ECU there. But, there's a lot of things in stock ECM that are advantageous for a street car. I mean, there's warm up tables, there's extra idle things in there that at least back then on like the Excel DFIs and some of those other engine management units. I mean, they were almost race only boxes. Like I said, you're like an 8x8 table, which means that you're very limited in the in-between areas of the map. So, driving at certain RPM or certain boost levels, you're really limited by it. Whereas, I don't even know how big the Cyclone Typhoon maps are. So
I can tell you real quick. Hang on.
Yeah.
But another advantage of some of the standalone units were the ability to provide input. That's one thing that the stock ECU struggled with, and it took a select few to be able to integrate something. Was if you wanted to add in an external input, you really didn't have that option. I mean, you had guys who were overriding sections of code that we didn't need to be able to input wideband data, in the early days. But now it's just, you have inputs on an aftermarket ECU, and you can just plug in things like you want to.
Yeah, you can do a lot of things. I mean, some of the I said but now I said with rewriting bits of code and stuff, and depending on how much support an ECU or a chip has, it's all about that. It's all about who can, somebody can actually do a lot of that stuff. It helps a lot. I mean, I run on the Skylines and stuff I deal with. I mean, a lot of people run standalones, but there's a factory based ECU called Niztune. And, that has a pretty good ability to control a lot of things. I like them. They work pretty well. They can do a lot of stuff. I mean, they even have, two-step in that built into them now. If you, and from the outside, it looks stock. So, I mean, and of course, a lot of people do put aftermarket ECUs. There's tons of stuff out there. But just like in the early days, the problem with putting any aftermarket ECU in, not only is it just the actual box itself, but wiring it up and making it work. I mean, because, you basically had to be pretty good at electronics to be able to put one in. Whereas if you have a stock chip, it's take it out, put it in. So, but, as long as somebody coded it for you. So yeah.
You mentioned about the stock table. It's a 17 by 14 on the timing table. So you're looking at 238 cells as opposed to 64 on an 8x8 table.
Yep.
I guess
lots of points.
I guess stepping in and like going further into the chipping, and to push into kind of what we touched on earlier, Hood, Code 59 came around, which, I mean, would you consider that was standalone?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's okay. So the stock bin is a 16 kilobyte bin. So the amount of data that you can shove into that is capped at 16 kilobytes. And if you want to add in more stuff, you either have to find a section of code that you don't need, and override it, like what was done for the really early wideband O2 stuff. And for guys who remember that, we had Data Master back in the day, and it had I forget what the actual feedback cell was, but they basically just rewrote a section of code. And when you viewed it on Data Master, it didn't correlate to wideband auction. It was a cell down there, but it actually gave you your wideband O2 data. And that was a revelation for us because we didn't have any way of recording that. Most guys had LED box on the dash or something like that gave it, and you kind of had to monitor it by eye and just remember it. Hey, at 4,400 RPMs, I'm a little lean, and then go back and make changes. And it was a very long process to fine tune the truck, but when it got to where you could record it in a data master scheme, it made things a lot easier because you could overlay that data and see exactly where the wideband went up or down or whatever. Code 59 doubled the binary size, so it went from 16 to 32 kilobytes. So you doubled the amount of data that you could have in a chip. So you got expanded tables for timing, for fueling. You got pre-made tables for scaling for like an AEM wideband O2 or innovative or a PLX or whatever homebrew wideband you had. All those things were just go in and select a box, and it was already pre-programmed in. So those guys did a bunch of the legwork to make that much more easier for the user to just go in and select the box and make a change.
So now, where does like auto tune fall into?
Yeah, so auto tune. Okay, so Code 59 in conjunction with some other things gave us the ability to kind of have a bubble. And anybody who's done standalone stuff knows the benefit of a tuning bubble. It's essentially a real-time silhouette of a bubble that hovers over what cell you're in. So if you're idling, it's down here, and then you blip the throttle and it jumps up and it shows you exactly where you are. Well, Code 59 kind of introduced us to that. A lot of those things we were limited also by the technology of the time. So we didn't have the data recording tools and those things, and they all kind of came about at the same time. So AutoTune expanded on that by allowing you to record a run, input it into a spreadsheet algorithm, and it would spit out essentially the changes you need to make, and it would kind of preform a bin for you. So whereas like Holly has a learning ability now, much like the factory ECU did, Sean was talking about how robust the factory ECM is. One of the things it could do is it could learn. It had a block learn multiplier, and it had real-time fuel trim that if you drove it, it got smarter, as it were. It essentially moved this sliding scale of fueling to make it where your driving habits were more fine-tuned within a smaller range. Well, once we got Code 59, it expanded that, and you could do more over a period of time. You could also map fueling based on wideband O2 data, which was a tremendous deal. So going away from just the limitation of, our narrowband oxygen sensor, having the wideband data where you could actually tune for it, not just monitor it, was a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I remember doing like Code 59 and getting tunes when we messed with it. And it's like literally you throw in a tune and it was okay, but like the more you drove it, the better the truck felt, until you got to a point where it's like, all right, it's not going to go any better. And then you tweak from there and kind of repeat the process again. And, you keep going and making all the refinements. So,
yeah, and I think everybody's familiar with a learn process. If you go out and you unhook your battery in your car and you hook it back up and you crank it up, it's going to idle funny. It's going to act kind of weird to start with. And then as you give it time, it learns where it needs to be. Well, we now have the ability to do that performance related. We can learn where we need to be in a performance manner.
Right. And I remember even like the early standalones too. I think at the same time we had a fast system.
Yeah, which became Speed Pro, didn't it? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, Speed Pro was first, and then they bought Fast, something like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, those
or the other way around. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I know the guys that are running standalones. Usually, those are the heavy hitter guys that were trying to go, deep tens into the single digits. I know. I mean, not to say you can't run standalone systems on a 11-second, 12-second truck, but it seemed like at least back in the early times when it first became popular, guys are like really heavy hitters.
Well, and you can take a Holly now. You can spend a couple of grand, put a Holly in a stock truck, and it will only improve your ability to tune a stock truck. But back in the day, it was kind of like you went around at Nationals and looked at trucks, and it's like, oh, he's got a standalone. Oh, he's also got an 80-millimeter turbo. Oh, he's also got these pound injectors. It kind of came with the territory. Like Sean said, it came with a certain learning curve of wiring and all sorts of stuff.
So, I mean, I remember early days at Nationals. I think watching Jake in the parking lot trying to tune trucks, I'm like, taking a wideband O2 sensor and shoving it up the exhaust pipe, just to get it reading and do tuning that way. So I'm sure you remember that.
Yeah, and obviously the ideal location for an O2, wideband O2, is much closer to the turbo. But given the fact that you could shove it in the tailpipe and at least get much broader, accurate data, was a big deal. And not to get off track, but essentially the difference between a narrowband and a wideband is, for a given range, a narrowband is accurate, but as it goes away from that range, as it gets farther away from stoichiometric, it gets less accurate. So it can actually read down to 10 to 1, it can read up to 17 to 1, but it's just not accurate at those ranges, whereas a wideband is. It's as accurate at 11 to 1 as it is at 14 to 1. And if you're trying to get your truck to stay in like a 10.5 to 11.5 range at wide open throttle, having that accuracy is a pretty big deal. It can mean the difference in melting stuff and not melting stuff.
Gotcha.
Not to come to a screeching halt on everything we're talking about, but for those of you that may be listening in and have never done any tuning of any sort as far as SyTys go, or maybe you're coming from like the LS world or anything like that, where you're familiar with like EFI and HP tuners and things along those lines. I mean, those programs are like light years compared to what these guys were doing back in the day. And I mean, even into 2000s and late 2000s, I mean, if you were still running a stock ECM, you were still, whipping out your old ass, what was it, prom grammar, things like that, and dropping a chip in and then taking it back outside because, you weren't running with a laptop, or if you did have a laptop, fucking stereo off of. So, you were dropping chips in, or you were burning multiple chips and then taking them out, running them, swapping them out, doing all sorts of stuff. They weren't doing, laptop in the parking lot, doing live on the fly, and then, testing it out. I mean, nobody was, for the most part, bringing, a bag full of equipment to burn a little ass chips to drop it in the ECM and then going out. So as far as tuning and chipping and all that stuff, I mean, flashable ECMs or whatever you want to call it, is just to have the ability to do that, either with standalone on a today's stuff, the Dominator, and versus what the guys were doing back then, and then the ultimate chip, whatnot, the multi-position chips, they were great too, because you were able to burn basically multiple programs onto just one single chip. So you had the ability to go out and, mess around with it, do whatever you were doing, if you had the ability to burn it all. I mean, otherwise, for the most part, you were at the mercy of whoever burnt the chip, whether it was for stock injectors, 50-pound injectors, whatever you were running. And then if you did make any changes, you had to send that stuff back out, get somebody to reburn it for you, and then see how it worked, kind of deal. I mean, I remember. Go ahead.
I was going to say, the Ultimate was a big revelation because, like you said, it still used a 16 kilobyte bin, but it was a 256K chip, so you could fit 16 of them on there, and you could have the ability to select between multiple programs. And you would see guys that be like, "Yeah, man, my truck runs great on T218, but it runs like crap on T320," and that's just the difference in programming for a specific combination.
And also kind of tying into what you mentioned with the Holly stuff about, dropping, $1,200, grand, whatever, or, whatever a standalone unit. I know there's additional stuff as far as harnesses and all that stuff you may need to buy to adapt that to a SyTy application, to whatever else. So I don't know exactly. I mean, Hood, you probably know what would be, to get up and go with a standalone Holly setup in a SyTy. What are you looking to drop there?
If you did all the work yourself, you're just roughly $2,600.
All right. And, comparative to, prior to even the 10-in-1 and the 4-in-1 chips and all that stuff, the Ultimate, back in the day, if you wanted to run Ultimate chips, I mean, you could do it, but you needed something like this. I know Sean was looking around for some of his artifacts, but
I was.
I got one of these here. It's basically, this is what exactly is in the Marlboro Cyclone
pack. Yes.
Is, you got one of these that you could run multiple chips in, and this one happens to be brand new. It's never been used. In fact, I've got the original credit card receipt from the old scan through credit card deal. I believe the date on this sucker is from 1994. The purchase price of just this stupid box, not even any chips or anything like that, was a whopping $813 out the door. So that's just for a box, so you can run a bunch of little ass chips in it. And I mean, it's still got the keys and the cable all in the bag, and the screws are still in the bag, and all that stuff. It's never been used. It's got the big fat ribbon cable here that's got to go with it, and I even have the warranty card. I should wonder if I can fill it out. In California, there, I don't even know if they still exist, but just looking through.
Pretty sure they don't.
I'm just curious, just because you dabble a lot in the import world, comparatively. Tuning versus SyTy versus what you're seeing in the range of cars that you do, is it the same? Is it different? I mean, does it compare or?
Yeah, no, it's all the same. It's all, basically it's all about who wants to modify the platform, because look, there's some platforms, there's nothing available for it. Nothing at all. I mean, there's Toyota, I do some work for Toyota, right? And here's one example. Here's one perfect example. So I raced a Sienna minivan in one lap of America. And the problem was that we were hitting the top speed limiter, 108 miles an hour is as fast as it would go. And so, we were running a little shorter tire, so it was actually a little less than 108, but we're hitting the limiter like the whole straightaway at Willow Springs. And so there was some tracks like Road America we were going to go to. So we wanted to try to turn, to raise that top speed limiter on the Sienna minivan, So I had resources a lot greater than the normal person. So, cause I had direct contact with the engineer who's in charge of the Toyota Sienna program. He tried internally to get them to give us an ECU with a raised limiter, with a raised, a disabled speed limiter. He couldn't do it. So in order to raise the speed limiter on the van, we had to, we ended up having to put in like a Dakota Digital box to intercept the signal that going from, because in that car, it came from the ABS unit to the speedo and then to the ECM. We had to attenuate that signal in order for us to be able to go faster than 108 miles an hour. Ooh. And so, that's a Toyota platform. So like the Hondas, Honda has Honda, which uses a factory ECU, got lots of cool shit. Lots of things available, really well supported. That's like a great box for Hondas, right? Nissan, Skylines and stuff. There's a place in Australia called Nistune. They do a lot of great things with that. I mean, you touched on some of the American stuff, HP tuners and things for some of the newer cars. But, in the import world, again, it just all depends on, what else is out there? I mean, because originally this stuff was all just ROM tuned, I mean, it's all like literally, the really early days of things. I mean, some cars like this Cappuccino, like if I had to tune it, I'm going to be back to burning fucking chips, man, so, so it's, I would say at least where the SyTy world is right now. I mean, obviously we're 25 years fucking on, but even once we started dabbling in the stuff I would say we started dabbling in it pretty well back in 97. I was definitely burning my own chips. So, and talking with a lot of the guys about different stuff in the code and I mean, digging that were before then, but definitely back in 97, I was pretty deep into, figuring some of that shit out. But, again, like I said, in other platforms, I mean, it just all depends on who supports it. Cause you have to have some nerd. some crazy fuckers that are going to want to do it. If you don't have them, like the Toyotas of the world, there's nothing available. Fuck, they can't. I mean, I said within Toyota, it's super difficult to. Sometimes it's kind of crazy how hard it can be to make some stuff happen in that platform. So
yeah, and to kind of expand on what Sean's saying, at least from our specific community, in the early days, you had companies like ATR and Conley and Jet and Hypertech and Kenny Vale who produced chips. They were reburned versions of the factory chip. So they were making minor changes, saving it and selling it as a chip. Most of where we've gotten to today is grassroots stuff from members. So you've got guys like Dig and Todd A and Green and guys like that who had trucks, and they were driven to make these changes and create these products because they directly benefited from it. It wasn't necessarily a business model for them. We don't have the numbers to appeal to a large corporation to come out and make some sort of great software package just for the Cyclone and Typhoon. And our trucks are unique enough that it would have needed that. There's nothing in the S series world that really carried over to us in that sense. So we got through 15 years or so of doing our own thing, and then Holley came out, and a lot of people say, oh, well, I put a Holley in my truck. Well, none of the Holley parts are SyTy specific. They just happen to make a 6-cylinder injector harness. They happen to make a bunch of these things that work for us. And then when you get into the tuning, you just select how many cylinders you have and you go to town. So you're taking a broad spectrum product and making it work for a Cyclone. Back in the day, these were Cyclone specific products that we had that would not work really in anything else that didn't have REC.
I mean, honestly, the business sense doesn't make any sense. I mean, when there's, what are we at? 8,000 total trucks or something like that. How many are we?
Yeah.
Around 8,000 or so. I mean, 8,000 of anything sounds like a lot, but I mean, you have to have, you're a niche. I mean, you're looking in, hundreds of things. So, I mean, how many hours of development can you really spend to do something? So that's where like the enthusiast side of it comes out. I mean, there's no way that any of this, a lot of the chip burning and chip stuff would have come out, would have even advanced unless, like you said, unless you're, there's more than just the business sense. It has to be like an enthusiast, somebody in there that really thinks it's cool, or there has to be something else driving it, because it just doesn't make any real business sense. I mean, if you're going to make parts for cars, you want to have the numbers there. You want to make shit for Ford F-150s because they make fucking 40,000 of them a month. So or they sell that many of them. So.
Yeah, and then you got to have, I mean, as far as the, the enthusiasts, you got to have the enthusiasts that have the knowledge and the background to do that kind of stuff, and not everybody has it. I mean, that's where, we were really fortunate to have guys like Dig and Green and Todd and all those guys, from the get-go that, put in all that legwork to come out with a product, and they were able to market it, and I'm sure, make it a little bit worthwhile, but in the end, they were doing it for themselves too, which is really what the driving force between, as far as a lot of SyTy projects go over the years, that's pretty much the driving force behind everything, is that somebody sees a need for a product because they want it for themselves, and they figure out how to do it. And if they can make some for, maybe part of the 8,000 other people that may still have one, that's pretty much how the world works in SyTy land here.
It's like SyTy, it's all self-supported. I mean, we don't have big, huge corporations and all that come in and it's like, hey, we're going to do this for you guys on a small, quick scale. Everything I've seen that's been in the tech in 20 plus years, it's all self-support and internal.
Yeah, I mean, almost everything is custom. I mean, at this point, if it's going to be something specific for these trucks, I mean, nobody's going to come out with, anything at this point. I mean, you can barely even find aftermarket stuff for the S series, first gen S series stuff at this point. A lot of that stuff's even been discontinued because there's no market for it. I mean, how many of those trucks are even, either still on the road or being customized to whatever effect? So, I mean, you see a huge drop off on certain products just after a point because, like Sean was saying, there's no marketing, there's no financial gain behind making a part for a 25-year-old truck at this point that, how many people are going to buy one? So
now,
how many people are going to spend, $5,000 on this part or $1,000 on this part, because, if you've got X amount of development, I mean, that's, you have to, he said, if you're a big company, it's got to make sense, even if you're a small company, it's got to make sense. I mean, you don't want to develop a product and end up, spending whatever it is and not getting anything out of it. I mean, if you make $100 off of it, I mean, was it worth your time, so.
And given, I think nowadays where we're at today, speaking about small companies and support, I think, in today's standards, we have Turbo Tweak, which is basically a plug and play chip that most everyone is in SyTy world today modifying their trucks knows about, which I think has done a great job in supporting the trucks and being able to have a nice product that has performed. I mean, I personally have a Turbo Tweak in my truck. I love it. I mean, the moment I plugged it in, no issues, and trucks ran great.
I'll probably end up eventually going with one. I'm still holding out on my my pit bull. My ATR never did me dirty. I love that chip. I mean, I ran that for almost the entire time I had my truck on the road. I still got it. It's sitting in the ECM right now. So I'll probably eventually upgrade to the late 2000. When did Turbo Tweak start coming out? Like 2014, 15, somewhere in there? Or is it earlier?
I don't recall.
I started getting on the market. At least I know he was big in the Turbo Buick world. I think before it came over to SyTy.
Yep. He's big in the Turbo Buick stuff.
My dates are getting a little fuzzy because I know I remember seeing it there, and then it started to pop up in SyTy land. So I can't pinpoint exactly when that was, but I want to say at least 14. I think is where he started making the big push and the transition to coming over to the dark side here.
So on the website, he has it copyright 2004. So I would say, I mean, it's been a good solid 5, 6, 7 years now, fully supporting SyTy.
Yeah. I mean, it's a remarkable chip. I mean, compared to even, not to knock any of the early stuff like the Ultimate, whatever, but I mean, as far as what you can do with that little tiny circuit board now compared to some of the dinosaur predecessors, it's pretty cool. I mean, I've messed with them very little. I mean, I'm no tuner by any means, even with chips or whatever. I mean, I've burnt stuff in the past and I've played around with a few things, but back in the day, Dig was helping me out with sending me different tunes and trying things left and right and just giving him feedback, and he would mess with them and email shit back to me or whatever else it was. But the Turbo Tweak stuff, you can pretty much mess with it. It's as advanced as probably as you're going to get with an EEPROM type setup. So
yep.
And I think as far as like standalone systems today, I think the Holley Dominator is the top winner as far as I see everyone using.
Well, and you're dealing with a universal product that's got a ton of money and support behind it, so it's not going anywhere. There's going to be parts for it. There's going to be harnesses available for it and stuff like that. And like we said before, they're not going to make anything SyTy custom, so you're going to have a little bit of legwork on your end. Like Sean mentioned, even back in the DFI days, you had to be competent at wiring in your truck to make it fit your truck, because they didn't just make a plug and play SyTy harness. I mean, that's kind of stuff didn't exist.
Motec system exhaust.
Yeah.
Hey, I do have Motec in the R34. I mean, a dash though. It's a data dash. It's not a ECU. It's data logging. So
wasn't there a Motec system in the race car, Sean?
Yeah. There's no. Actually, I used AEM. I used AEM ECU for the. There's an AEM that controls the engine, and there is a Motec ADL2 dash. Now, this dash piece right here. So this is 2005, I think, when we bought it. That's $6,600 for that. By the time you got the dash, the harness, the sensors, and this is pre-GPS shit, so you have to have a beacon that goes out the side there to read your lap times and shit. We were $12,000 into our Motec dash system. So you can do something so much more with like an AIM dash or something like that these days, for a couple of grand. But the Motec. Yeah, go ahead.
Isn't does the ECU in the GTR, does it control like yaw control and pitch control and stuff too?
No, so there's a separate ECU actually. So there's engine ECU. There's what's called a Tessa ECU, a Tessa and ABS. So a Tessa is the all-wheel drive system, and this car is unique. This car is a little weird. So there's the ECU for the a Tessa in the back there. Most normal Skylines, they have a G sensor, they have wheel speed sensors, and they control the torque split. Basically, there's a hydraulic clutch that locks up the center diff, and they control the amount of lockup of the center diff by inputs like throttle input and all those other things. So basically, a rear-wheel drive car is like when you're going around a road course or anything like that. A rear-wheel drive car is going to be generally fastest, until you're trying to pull yourself out of a corner or making a lot of power or anything like that. So as you're coming out of a corner, you want the all-wheel drive system to work. But if the all-wheel drive system's working all the time, the problem is with a fixed amount of split is that you end up with a lot of understeer. The front of the car pushes like a more locked four-wheel drive system. So the more open that it is going into the corner, the better, the faster the car is. And then as now you're going hammer down, you're at the apex and you're putting the throttle down, you don't want it to oversteer. Basically, you only have the way tires work is you only have like a total 100% amount of traction. So you can only have so much side grip and so much forward motion. And so when you're asking a tire to try to have a lot of side grip and also have forward motion, you're asking too much. You end up with oversteer or understeer or other kinds of conditions. And that's where like a Tesla system works. When you're coming out of a corner, it puts the throttle down. This car actually has a lockup, electronically controlled lockup of the rear diff. Normally on most normal cars, on most normal Skylines, that works with just the throttle. This car is special. It has some special shit by Nismo. It does use the yaw sensor in this car, but this is only in this car. We're only in these like Super Tycoon versions of the car. And so what basically that does is that, the more open a diff, the easier it is to turn corners. And if you've ever driven a car with like a really locked diff, it like when you try to turn a corner like real hard, it's like the two different wheels are trying to turn different speeds, and they're kind of hopping, and the car's kind of a little unstable and stuff like that. So with having the V-Spec, basically when you're off throttle, the rear diff's open, so the car turns really easily. And as you get into the throttle, it locks up. And again, so that's so you can put the power down, and it's not doing one leg peg leg shit. So, but again, it's all that's the way that four-wheel drive system works. And that car actually is adjustable. It's the same. It's actually a chipped factory ECU that Nismo did. So it has 4 positions for the all-wheel drive, split above and beyond stock, and then also has ABS control, wet and dry. So, but it's all based on the factory ECUs. So.
Nice.
Yeah. And it did have, honestly, that car raced with a factory ECU in it. So it just raced with a chipped, basically a chipped ECU. So Nismo, ran it on the dyno. They obviously have proprietary software where they can, set them up and run them. And, it ran, endurance racing in Japan on a factory ECU. I mean, we needed to get a little bit more crazy than that. We didn't want to run the mass airflow meters. So we put an AEM ECU in here. And that's basically what we run in this car. But, I've standalones and data dashes and stuff like that. I mean, I have a lot of AEM because they're local, but AEMs and Haltex and fucking Motex and blah 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 all the way through. Then dashes, aims, and Pi and all those things through the years. I've used a bunch of shit, so I know what I like and I know what I don't like. So, but most of them, for most of them, it's like when it gets to standalone. I mean, I know, like I said, in the SyTy world, there's only some that work easier than others. Sometimes if you don't want to go down the blaze of like forging your own path, you follow what other people have done. But in like the Skylines, there's 10 or 12 different companies that make ECUs that work for the car. And people ask me like, well, what should I use? And I say, use whatever your tuner likes, because it's more important that the guy tuning it knows how the fuck it works than, the numbers that are really in the boxes. I mean, most of the ECUs work pretty much the same. But if you've got a guy who really knows how to use that ECU, you're going to get a hell of a lot more out of it than somebody who has to learn, how exactly this particular ECU works, or, what kind of strange things happen. I mean, I can make, any AEM. I can make an AEM work on a Cyclone Typhoon. I mean, it's just a matter of sometimes figuring some of that shit out, but it wouldn't really be worth it. So, the amount of time you get into making it all happen, I mean, picking up the tack signals and doing all the other things that you got to do. Now, if somebody's already done it, obviously, then that's, kind of easy. That's, like you said, where the Holly stuff comes in, because it's already been done. So,
yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. As far as a lot of times, again, it's not worth it, and it takes the passion or the drive or the need or somebody with the ability to do it for themselves to do it first, and then after that, possibly it can either be mimicked or copied or go on from there. But I mean, as far as that's across the board with anything, whether it be body work or chips or tuning or I think that kind of goes hand in hand just with SyTys or any limited production vehicle, really. I'm sure it can relate to some way, shape, or form. So, as far as tonight's podcast goes, we're approaching an hour right now. We've certainly got a lot of things out in the open. We have a decent amount of viewers watching right now. We were up as high as I think 13 or 14. We're hanging in with 9 right now. We got a lot of people in on the chat. A lot of people are chiming in as far as they like hearing about the old stuff and how much it's evolved over the past 25 years or so, and the old tech and the Code 59 stuff, and again, a lot of people that weren't around from the start of SyTys and whatnot are just jumping in them now. They might have missed all that, and it's not a bad thing. I mean, you don't have to go through the growing pains of getting getting what you want out of it. Now you can just call up Tom at Sport Machines or go directly to Turbo Tweak or whoever else you want to deal with, and get a chip sent in and play around with it a little bit, and you're off and running. So it's a great thing, technology, and you gotta give it to the guys that have did the initial legwork back in the day. I mean, because if there was none of that, then these trucks wouldn't even be thoughts as far as making them still try to perform and do all the silly shit we do with them. And so as far as that goes, and certainly want to give a big thanks to you, Sean, as far as your input tonight.
No problem.
Hood definitely knows the stuff. I know you've done a lot of tuning as well. Like I said, I'm highly novice as far as that goes. I messed around with a little bit, but I am in no way, shape, or form a tuner by any degree. So for you guys,
if you're watching and you have questions, just post on our forum. I mean, all of us are on there. We'll answer whatever we can. If you want to go down memory lane, we can do that. If you have questions about, you want to do Code 59 or you want to do something off the beaten path, we'll help you as much as we can with that.
Yeah, definitely. I posted up the link on Facebook going back to the forum as far as the original codes and chips and what the differences were. So if somebody wants to read up on the the old school chips that were in these trucks and what GM did with them, or PAS, I guess, is really probably what was the driving force behind that. I don't really know who was in charge of the chips or tuning, but I would have to imagine that PAS did a lot of it. So, so that all that information's there. So it's linked a couple times on Facebook. You can find the forum thread that way as well. So, Adam, Hood, Sean, we got any other things we want to chat about? Do we want to look around Sean's garage anymore?
Well, still playing with cars. I haven't done much with fucking Cyclone or Typhoon in a while though, you know. So the last time my Typhoon ran, it ran 1180, and I sprayed on it, and it had like zero compression in like 2 or 3 holes. I mean, I think a couple of the sets of rings came out in like 47 pieces each, you know, like a little tiny little chunks of it, but still went 1180. So, and then I had another trans for my Cyclone, because I hurt the trans in my Cyclone the last time I had it out. Of course, you know, I've gone through a couple of those, and it was in the fucking warehouse fire, so I lost the. I bought a built trans from somebody who was sitting in there, and fucking anyway, I lost the trans, but I still have my Cyclone, I still have my Typhoon, I have, you know, a bunch of GTRs, a bunch of other shit, and you know, just getting around to getting some of that stuff running again. I still like the stupid truck, so you know.
Is one of your trucks still sitting on broken leaf springs?
Is whose?
Sitting on broken leaf springs?
Yeah.
Which one?
Didn't one of your trucks like break the leaf springs when you took it out the
The Cyclone did. Yeah, I had the fiberglass springs on it, and just sitting, it snapped. They snapped. So I put factory ones back in it. I kept factory ones somewhere, and I just put them back in. So, but you know, I think, you know, I had some really stupid combination of parts on that car, like stock turbo, built engine, like big converter, and a trans in it or something. So, you know, on drag radials, and like I had some really stupid combination. I mean, I was using it as a truck, you know, I was hauling engines and shit around with it. So, you know,
it's on somewhere of Nationals 99 of you doing figure eights in the parking lot.
Yeah, around then. Yeah, that was when. Yeah, it was rear wheel drive. Yeah, so I drove it out to Kansas rear wheel drive and drove it back. So, you know, I mean, I put a lot of miles on that. I put it, you know, I mean, on my Typhoon I put a punch, but the Cyclone I put quite a few too. So, but like I said, one day I'll get them back together. We'll see. So, right now I'm just, like I said, I'm pretty knee deep in fucking Skyline. So, yeah. We got like 60 or 70 cars, and so kind of keeps me pretty busy. So
that's cool. Well, it was good talking with you, and all your input was awesome. So we appreciate
All right. Well, remember, Morgan, 92's rule.
Yeah. Nice. All right, and on that note, I don't think anything else can be said. So, thank you for tuning in with us tonight, and we'll figure out what our topic is going to be in a couple weeks. I know with the, you know, various holidays coming up, we may bump some shows back, forth, cancel, whatever. So, just depends on how Thanksgiving and Christmas and all that stuff land, and who of us are available at the time. So we'll definitely come up with some more topics here going into the winter months, and stay tuned for those shows. So with that, good night.
See ya.